The hospital room was a sterile prison of white walls and beeping machines, but for Alexander Kane, it was a stage. His legs, once strong enough to carry him through marathons and across the sprawling estates of his billion-dollar empire, lay motionless beneath the crisp hospital sheets. His eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered with a mix of fear and determination as he adjusted the wheelchair beside his bed. The accident had been a carefully orchestrated lie, a deception so elaborate it had cost him months of planning, millions in bribes, and a piece of his soul. Alexander, one of the world's richest men, had faked a paralyzing car crash to uncover a truth that gnawed at his heart. Did Elena, the woman who had captured his every thought, love him for who he was, or was she, like so many others, enchanted only by the glittering allure of his wealth? The question wasn't just a curiosity, it was a wound, one that had festered since childhood, when his mother abandoned him to a cold, opulent mansion, chasing her own ambitions over his love. Now, at 38, with the world at his fingertips, Alexander was risking everything to know if love could exist without the shadow of his fortune. The door creaked open, and Elena's soft footsteps echoed in the room. Her perfume, a faint blend of lavender and hope, reached him before her worried eyes did. This was the moment. This was the test. Viewer engagement request. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of true love, please hit that like button, drop a comment, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts for more stories that touch the soul. Let's spread the warmth together. Alexander's life had been a tapestry of triumphs woven with threads of loneliness. Born into wealth, he'd grown up in a world where every smile came with a price tag, every handshake a hidden agenda. His father, a ruthless oil tycoon, had taught him to trust no one, while his mother's absence left a void no amount of money could fill. By his 20s, Alexander had built his own empire, tech startups, real estate, private jets circling the globe, but the richer he became, the emptier he felt. Friends were few, lovers fleeting, and loyalty a myth he'd stopped believing in. Then came Elena. She was a painter, her hands stained with colors that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. They'd met at a charity gala, where she'd stood in a corner, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around her. She hadn't known who he was, hadn't cared about his name on the Forbes list. She'd laughed at his awkward attempt to talk about art, her eyes crinkling with a warmth that made his guarded heart stutter. For the first time, Alexander felt seen, not as a billionaire, but as a man. Their romance bloomed over quiet coffee dates, long walks through city parks, and nights spent in her tiny studio apartment, where she'd paint while he watched, mesmerized by her passion. But doubt, that old companion, crept in. Was her love real, or was she, like everyone else, playing a long game for his wealth? The question consumed him, gnawing at the edges of every tender moment. He'd seen too many gold diggers, too many betrayals, to believe in fairy tales. So, he devised a plan, a staged accident, a fake paralysis, a test to strip away the veneer of his wealth and see what remained. The hospital became his crucible. The first weeks were a blur of feigned weakness and calculated vulnerability. Alexander, who'd once commanded boardrooms with a single glance, now let his hands tremble as he reached for a glass of water. He hated the lie, hated the way his body had to betray the strength he'd spent years cultivating. But more than the physical toll, it was the emotional weight that crushed him. Every time Elena visited, her eyes red from crying, her hands gentle as she adjusted his blanket, he felt a pang of guilt so sharp it stole his breath. She was there every day, without fail, bringing him books to read, sketches she'd drawn of the world outside, and stories of her life that made him laugh despite the charade. She'd sit by his side, her voice soft as she described the way the sunlight hit the park benches or the stray dogs she'd fed on her way over. Her presence was a balm, but it also deepened his torment. Was this love, or was she enduring his condition, because she knew his fortune was still intact? The hospital staff, paid handsomely to maintain the illusion, reported her every move. She never asked about his money, never mentioned his businesses. But Alexander's paranoia whispered, "She's waiting. She's biding her time." He pushed her away subtly, testing her limits, canceling visits, acting distant, letting silences stretch between them. Yet, she stayed. She stayed through his coldness, through the long nights when he pretended to sleep, through the moments he let his despair leak out in sharp, bitter words. Her resilience both comforted and terrified him. The challenge wasn't just maintaining the lie, it was living with himself. Alexander had always been a man of control, but this deception stripped him bare. He'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, wondering if he was destroying the one real thing he'd ever had. The hospital room became a mirror, reflecting his fears back at him. He saw the boy he'd been, abandoned and unloved, and the man he'd become, so afraid of betrayal that he'd built a cage around his heart. Elena's kindness was a blade, cutting through his defenses, but he couldn't let himself believe in it. Not yet. He needed proof, something undeniable. So, he escalated the test. He had his lawyer visit, loud and indiscreet, announcing that Alexander's accident had triggered a financial crisis. His companies were failing, his accounts frozen, his empire crumbling. The lawyer's voice carried through the hospital corridor, ensuring Elena overheard. Alexander watched her from his bed, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. Would she flinch? Would she leave? That night, she came as usual, her face pale but her smile steady. She didn't mention the lawyer, didn't ask about the money. Instead, she brought a small canvas, a painting of a single sunflower standing tall in a storm. For you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you're stronger than you think. He stared at the painting, his throat tight, his carefully constructed walls trembling. Months passed, and the lie grew heavier. Alexander's body ached from the pretense, his legs itching to move, his mind fraying under the weight of his own deception. He began to notice changes in Elena. Her clothes were shabbier, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He learned, through discreet inquiries, that she'd taken a second job to cover her rent, that she was skipping meals to save money. Yet, she never complained, never asked him for anything. One evening, she arrived with a thermos of homemade soup, her hands chapped from washing dishes at a diner. She sat beside him, her laughter quieter than before, and told him about a child she'd seen playing in the park, how his joy reminded her of what mattered. Alexander listened, his chest aching. He wanted to end the charade, to stand up and pull her into his arms, but fear held him back. What if this was still an act? What if her kindness was a long con, waiting for the moment he revealed the truth? But the evidence was mounting against his doubts. She was there, day after day, her love unwavering even as his fortune supposedly crumbled. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when she arrived soaked to the bone, her umbrella forgotten, her shoes squelching. She'd walked miles to see him because her car had broken down and she couldn't afford a cab. She didn't say it, but he knew. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Alexander began to unravel the lie, but not without cost. He orchestrated a miracle recovery, his doctors announcing that therapy had restored partial movement. The truth was, he could walk the moment he chose to, but he needed time to ease Elena into the reality. He started with small gestures, sitting up straighter, moving his hands with more confidence. Elena's joy was palpable, her tears falling as she cheered his progress. But the closer he came to revealing the truth, the more he feared her reaction. Would she forgive him for the deception? Would she see his fear for what it was, a desperate need to be loved for himself? The day he decided to tell her, he asked her to meet him in the hospital garden. The air was thick with the scent of roses, the sky a soft pink as the sun set. He stood, shakily at first, his legs strong but his heart trembling. Elena's eyes widened, her hands flying to her mouth. He told her everything, the accident, the lie, the paralyzing fear that her love was a mirage. His voice broke as he confessed, tears streaming down his face, a man who'd never cried in public now laid bare. Elena listened, her expression unreadable, her silence a knife. When he finished, she turned away, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, he thought he'd lost her. Then she faced him, her eyes blazing with hurt but also with something deeper, something unbroken. She told him she'd loved him through every moment, not for his money but for his quiet humor, his gentle curiosity, the way he listened when she spoke. She was angry, yes, but she understood his fear, because she'd faced her own, loving a man who might never trust her fully. They stood there, two broken people in a garden of second chances, and when she stepped into his arms, Alexander felt, for the first time, what it meant to be truly rich. The aftermath wasn't a fairy tale. Trust, once fractured, took time to rebuild. Alexander sold parts of his empire, redirecting his wealth to causes Elena cared about, art programs for children, shelters for the homeless. He learned to live with vulnerability, to let go of the control that had defined him. Elena, in turn, taught him to see the world through her eyes, where beauty existed in small moments, not grand gestures. They faced their fears together, building a life not on lies but on truths hard won. Alexander never forgot the cost of his deception, but he also never forgot the gift of Elena's love, a love that saw him, not his money, and chose him anyway. Their story became a quiet legend, whispered in the circles they'd left behind, a reminder that wealth could buy many things, but only courage could buy trust. Viewer engagement request. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of love and the bravery it takes to trust, please like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe to Gentle Hearts to join us in celebrating stories that make us feel, cry, and believe in second chances. Your support keeps these stories alive. Special request. Before we part, please leave a comment below sharing what this story meant to you or how it inspired you to see love and trust differently. Your words mean the world to us.